Yo! Video games.
What up, dudes, and welcome back to the YoVideogames podcast. I'm Matt.
And I'm Andrew.
And once again, thank you to all our generous patrons who've kept us going for nearly 500 episodes. We're getting there.
Yeah, if you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Due to the week is SFW. Thank you, SFW. I think been with us for a year or so. So rock on. Thank you so much. So we did a positive episode last week, and we're going to keep it going. We're going to keep going with fun evergreen right now because the news is all bad. Well, it's not all bad. I mean, there's some cool.
It's bad, but we're just gonna let things shake out. We're we're sitting here, we're waiting for that Switch 2 Direct.
Waiting for Xbox to confirm that it's coming out with 2 handhelds.
Right, that was crazy to hear. There's for those who don't know, like apparently there's some leak or insider report or whatever that by the end of this year they want an official Xbox branded portable PC game machine, which was super weird to me because I was like, what do you mean like Xbox branded? They already are deeply in bed with Asus with the beautiful ROG Ally X, as I'm holding it up here.
What if they're just going to come out with they're going to partner with Asus to make a?
Well, it was weird because it was
Xbox
saying
branded one.
I don't know, but because they're talking, because what they're talking about is they're going to put like an Xbox button on here. Because the thing is, the ROG Ally X comes with 3 months of Game Pass or something when you buy it. So I think they're already in bed with one, but apparently there's going to be another one. But they're going to have. But the news there is that rather than be a Microsoft made, branded, sold product, it's not the Microsoft X Boy. It is going to go. They're going to go to Asus or Lenovo or someone, and they're going to make their own thing. But Xbox will have special branding on it, which kind of feels like a cop out. A cop out. I'm like, you don't need to do that because the ROG already exists. But whatever.
It's a cop out. They're cowards.
Yeah,
give me the X Boy, you cowards.
Yeah, give us like a closed platform because they're still talking about like, hey, it's going to run Windows 11. You can run and operate it like a PC, like the ROG already does, whatever. But
I don't want it to run Windows 11. I want it to run the Xbox operating system, and I want it to be able to cast to my smart TV if I'm near enough to it.
Which, by the way, Windows 11 is terrible, and it is by far the worst feature of the Ally. You can debloat it. You can maybe put a different OS on it if you want, but
people keep
at least it's open enough to do that.
I keep getting those messages from Microsoft where like, hey, in October we're not going to support Windows 10 anymore. You won't get any updates at all for it, and I'm like, I don't care. I'm not going to Windows 11,
bro. When I had 7, it was like I ran on 7 supportless for fucking years.
Yeah, I'm not doing it. I'm not getting Windows 11. I will wait until 12, maybe even 13, depending on how bad 12 is. Yeah. We're going to see. We're going to find out together. But we're going to do another fun episode. And it's decade by genre. So we're going to do the 20th century. And each decade, we're going to assign a video game genre that best encapsulates that decade. Now, you might be wondering, like, how are you going to do the early 1900s when there were no video games? We're not doing it based on what came out in that decade. We're doing it like this genre best encapsulates that decade of history. It's like a weird crossover baby. It's a little mutant baby.
Getting my notebook out for it and everything.
It's a weird, ugly. Oh yeah, and the other rule that we have is we can't double up. We can't say the same genre for 2 different decades. So 10 decades.
Right. Now I'm willing to stretch a little bit because again, like so many games use third person. So, if one genre is in third person, that doesn't necessarily mean, well, only that decade can have third person camera. No, that means a third person shooter, third person platformer, yada, yada, yada.
Third person adventure, action, that kind of thing.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
So there's just too many genres share viewpoints. We can't sit there and like camera cannot be tied to genre.
You don't define a genre by its camera.
So I don't know. Should we start at the beginning? Do we go in reverse? I say we start. My thing is start at the beginning, move up.
So 1900 to 1909.
It's 1909.
See, this is like, how do you define a turn of the century, and how do you have it not be the Western adventure? Like,
Right.
but then if you
So
say it's Western adventure, that's just a third person shooter, and I don't.
here's where I go, and I'm already going to be like, okay, this is going to be more like a subgenre, because at first I was thinking like, okay, you could maybe do like art like a RTS, but what about instead a first or third? We can debate on this survival simulator,
Ooh,
like like an Ark or something. But you're a homestead or like a rancher or something in the early 1900s.
well, you got the
Now,
Oregon Trail.
right now, here's an things to remember: Arizona and New Mexico were not part of the Union in 1900 to 1909. Their 1914 was when they became states. They were like really late. They were territories. Um, so you still sort of technically have this wilderness sort of angle on them in
Hmm.
1900. So if you were say you're like a New Mexico and you're like a rancher or something, either a rancher or a cowboy, just a survival base. Because if you're a cowboy, that's actually kind of fun, because then you actually have to move herds across, get them, raise them, move them to like the trains stations to get picked up and get paid or whatever. And then you have all these things kind of in your way, moving a herd across, one place to another. Get them to like Santa Fe or getting them to Albuquerque, whatever.
So if we do like a survival, is it a survival or is it like a farming simulator?
Well, that's
Like
what I
a
was thinking.
ranching
Kind of,
simulator.
it
What
is like
genre
kind of
is that technically? Puzzle
survival
adventure?
crafting.
Survival crafting, you're saying, would be like
Yeah.
the
Like, okay,
okay.
if something breaks down, you have to like go and fix it and rebuild it, kind of thing. You have to like fix your own fancy whatever. You're trying to create a sort of ranch, like a long-standing ranch empire. Say it's like, oh, you bought land or you inherited land or whatever,
Okay.
and you're trying to build up your ranch. And part of that is building up the ranch, doing kind of like farm sim stuff. But then you have to actually, ride a herd to the train station, get paid. That's like, and farmers and ranchers were all kind of cowboys were always at each other's throats, because farmers are trying to like build land, cultivate land, and cowboys are just kind of like walk across it.
Those
And
damn free grazers.
well, yeah, they hated each other, and they would get in each other's way or whatever. But
Uh, this is totally random aside, but I was driving into town today, and I passed like a 1980s Nissan, like pickup truck. One of those
nice.
tiny pickup trucks in the back, filling the entire bed. Okay, and I don't live in the sticks; I live in the city. Two big hogs, not tied down, not restrained in any way, just standing there, 70 miles an hour down the freeway, and I'm just riding behind this guy, and it's just two pigs looking at me out of the back of a tiny Nissan. And I was sitting there like, I got to take a picture of this, but I didn't know how to safely get my
Yeah.
phone from where it was. I was like, just two big ass pigs. That's right. I live in Dixie. And in I live in like the city. Anyway, all right, so we're gonna do like now. This isn't Red Dead Revolver, obviously. We're not gonna because that's more of a
Right.
third person shooter. So we're
I mean, it's open world, if anything. Well, not Revolver. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Red Dead Revolver is shooter, third person shooter. I'm saying survival crafting sim.
okay.
The
So like,
way Ark, Minecraft, Lego, Fortnite kind of operates and functions, but on a more technical level.
Rust,
Yeah.
a
Something
little bit
closer
like
to that.
Rust. Okay, okay. I could say okay. 1909 is the survival genre.
Yeah, and then you could have a persistent online world too, where it's like this chunk of the Southwest that's still not technically state, and you could have people who cattle rustlers, people who like you who are trying to build their own empire, their own
Mm.
ranching empire, and they may interfere with yours. I would
So does
hate it
that mean we're
personally, but
talking about an MMO? Because that's its own genre, and I was
Not an MMO. Well, I mean, kind of MMO, but like it could be a persistent online world. It could be like an
Mm,
instance-based world too, kind
okay.
of the way Lego Fortnite does it. But I'm saying survival crafting world where you're trying to build up your ranch. And technology is limited. You do not have automobiles. I mean, technically automobiles kind of technically exist, but I'm saying
They're there.
you don't have an automobile. You don't have pickup trucks, right? You are still using horses and carriages almost entirely for the most part, right?
Okay.
You are still using Smith and Wesson. You're using Winchesters. You're not using the 1911 didn't come out till
Right.
1911, so you do not have automatic pistols, stuff like that. So it's
Ha
still
ha ha!
technically
Joke's on you. There were stripper clip pistols of
mm.
the time. Internal magazine.
They definitely had some interesting stuff. If you've ever been to a weapon museum, there were some weird, clever things they did, and with early prototype machine guns and stuff too. So, but yeah, this is the idea here is that like you're not on the cutting edge of technology, anyways. You're a rancher, so again,
Yeah.
this would be like a couple years after Red Dead Redemption 2, if you want to like timeline wise this.
The
But
Mauser C96 came out in 1896. That's the Red 9 in RE4, in case anybody wants to know.
but how much widespread use was it really getting, you think?
To be fair, it was manufactured in Spain and China, so widespread, maybe not widespread, but a whole lot of people did have them population wise. You probably didn't see it in the American Southwest, yes, but I'm just saying there was someone out there busting 5, 6, 7, 8 caps. they're just you need it for the wild hogs.
So
You gotta have
I'm
them for the
saying, do
critters.
you have any objections to an online survival crafting game
No,
set
as long
in
as
the
we aren't
1900s?
removing MMOs or third person shooters, as long as we're not including them.
No, because this is a survival crafting style.
Okay,
Um,
then no, I do not. I won't fight you on that. All right, 1910 to 1919. So this is I feel like we know what we're going to want to do for like the 1920s,
by
1920s.
the way, I'm not limiting this to America. This is not about like where in America was, but if we are American, so we're more familiar
It's easier
with.
to
But we are not limiting it to that.
yeah, I mean if you're if well, I know we definitely have like Aussies. Australian history is cool too. If you listen to the Dollop podcast, they have a whole series of Australian history too.
Hmm.
I mean, they're technically an American history podcast, but they have a whole series. Australian history is so it is like a weird window into our past.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the 1900 online survival crafting. I was saying Arizona, New Mexico. You could do that in Australia. It
Oh, I
might
mean,
get
you
a
can do
little
that anywhere.
weird and
I
messed
mean,
up, but like it would be a perfect place to do an online survival ranching kind of simulator, 1900s Australia. So
turn of the century. I mean, the reason why, like, say, The Mummy, or why so many adventure movies take place in that, like, the first 30 to 40 years of the 1900s, because that's sort of the last time technology couldn't conquer everything.
right, right.
You didn't have Harrier jets to get you out of places. like,
Or
you,
helicopters, even.
right, you didn't have things that could like get basically anywhere. Like today if you're going to go out into the wilderness, you can take a GPS locator, and in an emergency you can hit that thing, and like pretty good chance someone can get to you within 48 hours tops.
Yeah.
It's like this is that stretch of like 1940 and earlier. I guess you could say it goes all the way up to like 1950 is the last section. It's the last decades where like you go out and really get lost.
Mm.
Homesteaders in Alaska, there are people that went out and technically homesteaded and just were never seen again. Lived whole lives out in the Alaskan wilderness and died. And then like you're just wandering through Alaska, what is now a national park, and you find like 100-year-old cabin and a dead body inside. And you're like, well, um, okay, 19.
I hope they lived. I hope they had lived a good, healthy life. I guess. And the little bear came around and ate them.
Hell yeah, man. I don't know. Getting rid of the Homestead Act is one of the worst things we ever did, and we did
Mm.
it for oil companies. Those bastards. It was one particular man. Um, but I 1910 to 1919, because it is when the World War happened. When like
It's the
and
Great War.
the Great War. The thing is like when we think about World War II to versus World War One, people don't really imagine the brutality of World War One. The scale of World War One was every bit as large as World War II, but it was the first industrial war. Every journalist of the time that was on the front described battle as weird. They use the same language. It'd be like it's weird and strange and dominating. You could be miles away and you're hearing the battle as it's happening.
Yeah.
And it's just this weird, unrelenting noise and constant terror and boredom mixed together. And then add to the trenches basically being an open sewer constantly, and
Right. So more people
it's hell.
died not fighting in the trenches than
Right.
even, on the quote unquote battlefield. People died just by sinking into mud.
So part of me is like, I'm torn between a horror genre, which if we don't use it here, I know what decade I want to use it for later, but I'm torn between like a horror genre, or is this where we do the MMO genre, the true MMO?
Well, I was actually thinking of I was actually going to say survival horror, um,
Mm.
because to mix the sort of shitty pseudoscience of the time, to be in an asylum because you have shell shock,
Well, yeah. Well,
from the Great War, and possibly in either certain parts of Europe, like where they would sometimes just put an asylum on an island and just like
right.
leave people, it's like,
Well, they did that in
or
New York too. New
in New
York
York
has
too.
a little
But
island in the Hudson River.
yeah. But I was thinking, like, I forget where it is, like Italy or Greece or something. There's like some famous super haunted asylum from this, or something even in Russia post revolution.
Well, I
Um,
mean, Russia has loads and loads of haunted sites, I'm sure, from all the people who accidentally died during a
right.
certain
So
30-year period.
So the idea being like a survival horror where you're in an asylum from being a quote unquote shell shock soldier, or even on the wrong side of the Russian Revolution, as it were, and
There was
they're
no
doing
there was no right side of the Russian Revolution. It was pretty bad for
well.
everyone involved, really.
The point is like you were on the losing end of it, right? So like
Fair.
they throw your ass in an asylum, and they're kind of just using it as a way to test the effects of hallucinogenic drugs.
This is specifically, it's that genre of horror that Outlast is, where you can't fight back.
Right.
There is no fighting back. It's just you're trying to avoid, evade, survive. And it's this creepy, terrible, what's the genre of survival horror, specifically horror, that is Outlast or The Abyss or, um, not The Abyss. God, why am I blanking on, starts with an S or an A, I mean. But
Amnesia?
Amnesia, thank you. God, Abyss. What am I? Amnesia, you know, Soma, that genre
Right.
of horror where you're just like, you're confused, you're alone, everything's creepy, and you cannot be caught. If you're caught, you're dead. Like that
Right. So
specific.
I'm thinking of like something like that where either during or like during the end near the end of a war or like post war and
I mean,
you
Amnesia has that World War One.
right. So they already have the bunker. I'm not,
Yeah,
which is fantastic. But
but
I'm
it is
talking about like
correct. It's the correct genre for this time period.
I'm thinking like, okay, like you're in asylum, you've definitely been experimented on with experimental drugs. So you're seeing and hearing things that aren't really there. So it's not supernatural. It's sort of like the power of the human mind,
Mm.
and being way too tampered with, electroshock therapy, stuff like that, or whatever. And you're just in like a really horrible place, and it's just sort of like trying to get out of
Well,
it.
so this does take place in Russia.
Yes.
um, okay. I could see that. The reason that I imagine this decade, I mean, granted, not all of this decade was horrendous, but this decade in particular being this kind of horrendous, inescapable, creeping horror.
Because I was either thinking that or like being part of like a like Rasputin's cult or something like that.
Yeah, okay. That's no, if we're gonna do cults, that's gotta be the 60s. That would have been like 70s, 60s, 70s. 60s is cult. A lot of cults happened in the 60s.
Yeah.
A lot of cults happened in the 60s. But we can't do cult horror again. So I'm gonna say this is that survival horror genre. What is the specific genre? Do they just call that survival horror because they don't have a better name
First
for it?
person survival horror. I don't know.
Because
But
survival horror to me, when I think of it, is like Silent Hill or, um, you know, Resident Evil. Obviously, it's about resource management and you can fight back. But I don't know that because like Outlast doesn't have resource management.
it has battery resource management.
I guess it's the worst kind of resource management, I suppose. Um, Zombie U is a survival horror that really encompasses a lot of the
Yeah.
perfect things of survival horror to me. So I'm like, actually, doesn't that take place in the 60s? When
Zombie.
does
No.
when does that take place?
I think it was just supposed to be modern time.
Modern day. Hmm.
Yeah.
Um. Okay, 1910 to 1919 is going to be survival horror, but specifically, okay. I was gonna give survival. Of course, I was gonna say the 90s is the decade of survival horror, but we're gonna change that now. 1910 to 1919. Um, So 1920 to 1929. Now this is the visual novel era. This is your Leisure
Oh,
Suit Larry. You're going over the top. Too many parties.
Andrew wants a visual novel era in 1920. I was actually going to go bold on this one.
Oh, what's more bold than the horniness of a horny visual novel, point and
I
click
was
visual
I
novel?
I was actually gonna suggest going full open world in the 20s.
Really? Nah.
But I see what you're saying here though, because getting into a nitty-gritty, if you had a really like fucking good art style, for like a really bold like do we want like visual novel where you don't really interact or point and click?
I'm gonna say point and click.
Okay.
Because this is
Yeah.
like people think of the roaring 20s in the US if you're from the United States, but like everywhere was kind of having a booming, the depression that came after affected everywhere too, but like everywhere was having kind of a boom time in the 20s. Everybody was just so jazzed that World War One wasn't done. People were sort of manic. So in my mind, a point and click where you're just like hijinks again, Leisure Suit Larry, for all of its faults, perfectly encompasses in my mind what this
Prohibition shit
decade.
too, are we talking or
Yeah, I mean, part of Leisure Suit Larry is getting things that aren't technically allowed, that are, you know, uh, under the radar type thing. In his case, it's enemas, but you know, we don't have to do that. Although, actually, I think in the 20s is when enemas became very popular, like colonics.
Gandhi was a big fan of them too. I
Yeah, well,
don't
Gandhi was actually a pretty messed up dude. The more you read about him, like he
yeah,
also liked to
don't look
nap
in
naked with
don't,
young girls.
yeah,
So
don't look into it or else your opinion of him will be shattered forever. Maybe actually do look at him. You should know your history.
yeah, you should check that out, I guess. Gandhi did a lot, but apparently he also just like had horrible breath.
Gandhi did a lot. He also did a lot too.
He sure did.
But anyways,
Um,
okay. So what I'm saying, okay. So I guess what I'm getting at here is point and click survival horror, or no, sorry, survival horror. Jesus, on the brain. Point and click adventure game.
right.
Um, maybe even closer to something like a Telltale, Tales from the Borderlands, kind of.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, no, I could give it that too. I don't know that those technically count as point and click, but it feels like the evolution of a point and click.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Like it's
kind
not
of. I think point and click is a little more in depth over what you have to like manage and stuff because those ones are usually sort of like just walk to this person, talk to that person. They're sort of like in an in between a visual novel and a point and click, I guess. But
right. And some of them are done really well. Wolf Among Us is still I still think about that game all the time, and that's
Mm.
basically all it is the Telltale.
Here's what I would say if we were doing like a honest to god 1920s, because I don't know, do you have like a specific area? I don't know if it'd be like New York or something or something, but
Well, I mean, if it's going to be 20s and we're thinking about US specifically, Atlantic City is like the place in the 20s.
or Chicago.
Chicago has, yes, there's like lots of gangs and parties and stuff, but Atlantic City was like the heart of United States debauchery.
I mean, could it even be? It could even be multiple. You could like travel between like Chicago, London, New,
It
you
could
know,
be Shanghai. Shanghai was
Shanghai.
basically the Atlantic City of the East,
Well,
apparently.
I'm thinking you would be like a smuggler, maybe either a detective chasing some smuggling operation, or the operation itself might be more.
Like a rum runner would be a
Yeah,
good
but
if
I'm
it's United
thinking,
States.
it would actually be kind of fun if we don't limit ourselves to like reality in a sense of like, wouldn't it be kind of like crazy and wild if you went, okay, it's only going to be on Steam. We want to make it AO because it's going to get real
We
nasty.
want to watch the enemas.
Well, no, like you want to watch, but I'm saying say like you say you are a rum runner or whatever, and you have to like torture a dude or whatever. Remember how like Manhunt 2 got dinged for this, you know?
Yeah, well, Manhunt 2 got dinged for a lot of things, I suppose.
Right, but I'm like just saying like, what if it was like the Roaring 20s, like debauchery, like openly taking drugs, just like wild sex orgies, like
Cocaine was a cold medicine.
cocaine, right? And then lots of like just violence and people getting gunned down, chopped up, whatever.
Okay.
Just like a really steamy, just like this is like
Your
a
Al
hard,
Capone on his rise.
right? Like yeah, exactly, like really steamy, like Roaring 20s game where it's not just the glitz and glamour, but also just like how insane things would get.
It's
Uh,
the decade the hand job was invented.
was it?
I don't know. It's just like a weird thing is like that seems to be when like hand jobs started to be talked about. I was doing research for
I think the bikini was invented in the 20s. I think
was it
they
20s or
get.
30s?
I think it was the 20s because it was like the whole Roaring 20s and like remember how like, oh no, don't show your ankles, you'll go to hell,
Yeah.
from the 1910s, and then someone's
Can't
like,
get
well,
pregnant from a hand
like we're
job.
not going to show our ankles, we're going to show the whole ass body except except the bits, except the naughty bits or whatever. So
I was doing for some reason I thought bikinis were from the 60s actually now that I think about it.
well,
But
got popularized, but like I learned this in the Smithsonian.
hell yeah. That's where I learned about the hand job. No,
Oh, that's where you go. Maybe that's where you got one. I'm just
I was right. Could you imagine? Could you imagine the prestige of getting a hand job in the Smithsonian?
Smithsonian.
You're listening to Teddy Roosevelt's real voice
I've heard it. He
and
is
getting a
very
hand
high
job.
pitched.
Yeah, well, that's what makes the hand job sound nice. No, I was doing research for some short film, I think, and I somehow came across that like the hand job was a thing of the 1920s. They were just
Nice.
very popular at the time, you know? No evidence of a hand job. I don't know. I don't know why that stuck with me. I'm so sorry. I hope
Just
I'm
really,
wrong. I hope that's just like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy?
just really wants a hand job, I guess. I don't know.
Look, hand jobs are bottom of the barrel, but no one's ever said no to a hand job. If that's what's on the table, you take the hand job. Okay.
So I'm saying we're saying for the 1920s sexy, gory point and click.
Okay. Hyper excessive point and click.
Yeah, and like really strong art too. Like we're talking something like like Vanillaware level of art or something like really like things gonna look like it
Okay.
looks budget, like it looks like it has a pretty decent budget kind of thing. That's what I'm thinking in my head.
Okay. So
Big jazz soundtrack, everything, just
1930 to 1939 has to be the adventure game, right?
you're right. Like adventure game, like comparison to what, like a Tomb Raider? Are we talking, or are we
Yeah, we're talking
talking?
about this would be like the Tomb Raider, the Indiana Jones, the what is it, Pitfall? What was the really old school?
Pitfall
Was
was the Atari game.
yeah, Pitfall, like it's the Indiana Jones Rolling Thunder takes place. I mean, that's a shooter, but still, it's the adventure game. It's the globe trotting adventure game. Those are the
Mm,
years. Technology was heavy enough that you could take a boat or a plane almost anywhere,
yeah.
and also the world was still open enough that like travel was a feat. Like today travel is a feat, but also like most anyone can figure out how to get to a place. It's still scary for a lot of people, but like travel's never been easier. The 30s is when travel was like first opening up,
Yeah.
but
I
you
mean,
could still die of dysentery if you went to Egypt. Like, so
right, because this is like like you said, like it's the last gasp of real adventuring. Real kind of like diving into unknown a bit.
yeah, like I mean, maybe I'm biased because it's when the Mummy and when I mean the Mummy was in the 20s, wasn't it? No, it
I
was
think so.
didn't the Mummy
Some of
take
his 20s or
place?
70s,
Yeah, it took place in the early 30s, I think. Oh,
something like that.
um, does the Mummy take place? Google 1920s. Yeah, it takes place between 1923 and 1926. So never mind. But point is that's the years of this genre. How often is a game set in the 30s? How often is an adventure set in the 30s? It's that like one, you have the ultimate bad guy, right? You have the Nazis scrambling around for occult stuff. So
Yeah.
you have that ultimate easy to explain bad guy. You don't have to like go into any detail. It's a Nazi, he's bad. Um I have to say, like, if we're gonna there's no other decade in the 20th century where adventure makes more sense. This
Right.
is the adventure
Maybe the
decade.
20s, but like 20s, 30s.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
I think
no
30s works better just because airplane technology was way
automatic
further
weapons,
advanced. Yeah, automatic
more
weapons.
prolific.
It just works a little better because
You can drive a truck across the desert without worrying about it breaking down and you dying.
right. You're not
You know,
hand cranking every automobile kind of thing. So
hand jobs. Hand jobs were big in the 20s. The hand cranking, come on. We're gonna keep coming back to this. I'm sorry. Like, that's the easiest decade. 1930
probably. I mean,
1939.
we don't want to do like let's do a, stock market simulator and like grow your empire out of depression or whatever. It's like
Yeah, it's this is the civilization turn-based real-time strategy. Which is weird. Turn-based and real-time strategy. Turn-based strategy? Civ is sort of both, I guess. It is
kind of,
turn-based, but it
yeah.
is also real-time-ish. Like
Kind
it
of,
does
yeah.
the
I
turn.
guess it's a thing.
So we could say it's that too, but I think that's more of an 80s genre.
Hmm.
Um, or the flat out shooter. The first 80s feels like the first person shooter, but still okay. 30 to 39, easy one. It's adventure, and we
It's
know
a third person adventure.
we
It's
all
a Tomb
know what
Raider,
the
Indiana
third person
Jones.
adventure is, right? It's Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, that kind of thing. Now we get into what I was originally going to say was the first person shooter decade.
It's the 40s.
40 to 49.
It's the first person shooter decade. How's it not?
Well, because the 80s could also be the first person shooter decade.
It could, but
The 80s is it's the decade of Arnold,
sure.
right? Although I guess you could say it's the action adventure genre. The action game is the 80s. Could be that too. So
Right,
okay.
but yeah, because the problem with not really the problem, but it's like okay, in the 80s, what the Russians again or whatever? Like who's your villain?
Well, yeah, communists. Again, that's you don't have to explain it. Like it's the Soviets. The
I
Soviets are the
guess.
bad guys. You don't have to explain anything. It's an action game, and the Soviets are the bad guys. We're good.
Okay.
80s are an easy. Yeah, I'm sure there's tankies that are really mad right now, but I don't care. But the 40s, first person shooter makes the easiest sense. Again, you got submachine guns are prolific. Yes, the Thompson technically came out in the 30s, but right now you got the first assault rifle, right? The Sturmgewehr, I'm not sure. The STG-44.
STG.
It's the first. It's what the AK-47 was a ripoff of. Um, you have the MP-40, you have the grease gun, you have the Sten gun, you have the Thompson. Like you have machine guns in people's hands now, not just like mounted machine guns. Now,
Yeah.
person can walk around with it's 9mm or 45 in case of the grease gun and the Sten gun and all that. But like, it's the first person shooter genre. It's the reason why Medal of Honor, it took them 2 decades to get out of World War II. It is the FPS decade.
Kind of has to be.
I can't think of another genre that would perfectly.
We could try to fit another genre. You could make other genres fit. You could, but like at the end of the day, it's like the other problem is like, well, is anything more fitting than no, there really isn't. And so many video games have proven this over and over. So I don't even know if we even have to explain any more beyond why first person shooter for the 40s done.
Right. Half the decade was taken up with a world war.
Yeah.
Bing bang bosh, that one was easy. Now the 50s, I have a really good one that you may argue with. You might have something in.
I'm a little conflicted, conflicted, lost, whatever. What are you thinking?
It's the Tycoon. It's the Tycoon genre. It's the.
See, I was thinking that too. Like, what if it's
Roller
like
Coaster Tycoon, the Civ game?
What if it's like the business simulator era is the 50s, where you're really growing your empire out of the post-war?
Right. It's the cheat code decade. It was the decade where it was almost impossible to screw up. Which just makes it perfect for Tycoon, Roller Coaster Tycoon, Railroad Tycoon. Wasn't there also like a fishing tycoon?
Probably.
Crap like that. You have your Civ build up. It's almost like the Sims genre too could work in here, where it's like.
I'm actually gonna have to agree with you on this one. It's not a genre I personally enjoy or play, but it's like it's a good one for the 50s.
I really love Civ. It's my like I don't like playing it against people. I love just sort of like turning my brain off and rolling through Civ. I have no idea why. I couldn't begin to explain to you why I enjoy it, but I do. Roller Coaster Tycoon, also another fun game that I played as a kid that was like you just turn your brain off and build theme parks and stuff. But I also loved Legos. And you weren't like a big Legos fan, right?
Not as much. I mean, they're cool, but it's also like frustrating when you see something cool on the box, and then you open it up and you're like, all right, now build the cool looking thing on the box, and you're like,
yeah. To be fair, I have a lot of hobbies like that. I'm building a record cabinet currently out of walnut and ash.
There you go.
It's going to take. I'm doing it entirely with hand tools. It's going to take 40 some odd hours to make it.
I mean, okay, so
I'm still broken, I still love that Roller Coaster Tycoon, that Civ, the Lincoln Logs and the Legos. I'm still that mad lad,
Now it's into wood carving for fun.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be also kind of fun if you were a little more how Civ does, where like you're an individual or whatever. And since this is a single decade, you can do this. And I think corruption and other things should be part of it. You know what I mean? It's not just like build this, collect money or whatever, but it's like, okay, you can take like government schemes or bribes to like, advance your thing a little further, and then like that may have repercussions down the line. Like do some weird stuff with it.
You might end up with too many freeways and not enough railroads.
Right, something like that. Like, you have to attend to company parties, and you're trying to wine and dine, and then someone sends like, some lady over to like basically like, hey, let's go have some fun, sailor. And then like you get caught in like in a scandal, like she was there on purpose, whatever. Like,
so you almost get like a visual novel aspect to, or like a point and click aspect to that world building Tycoon game.
I would say build it into the economy thing, where it's like, look, you can try to run this legit, but it's going to take you longer, or you can take shortcuts. But what are those? What will those shortcuts? What might happen with those shortcuts?
You short taken son of a bitch. Shortcut taken, son of a bitch. You know I love a good
What if
shortcut.
what if you make like a deal with someone and that person goes bankrupt or whatever, or you go bankrupt, you become like indebted to a loan shark kind of thing, stuff
You
like
end up
that.
into the Russian mob and or any mob really.
I'm always wanting to show the seedy underbelly of these tycoon simulators.
Seedy Underbelly. That's a good band name.
See-
We're going with it. So 50 to 59 is now granted, if we were going from the like warfare, the Korean War for US and Korea happens, and that is a World War II sized war. That is still LISCO, large scale combat operations, still like big, huge scale. So we could have made an argument that it was a shooter decade too, but I think it was a building decade for most of the world. For most of the world, it was the decade that
yeah.
we all just built the hell out of things. We
I mean,
still
again,
built things.
you could do this in multiple countries where they built up really big. Not just America, but like
Unfortunately,
Japan,
brutalism
Europe.
came into. Actually, I like brutalism. I'm one of the only people I know that likes brutalism, but what are you going to do? It's the horniness of architecture for brutalists. It's the oh wow, you're so much bigger than my last boyfriend of architecture. it's Architecture's got to be horny.
Put that back in the 20s. Our sexy, gory point and click with all the Art Deco stuff.
Hell yeah, Art Deco is horny. All right, so now we're into the decade of Colts, 60 to 69. What
I was thinking stealth, like
really
something.
the
I was thinking something
60s?
along like stealth, like Hitman or Splinter Cell, but even more low tech, like super low tech style Splinter Cell. Cold, like thick into the Cold War. You're kind of going to locations. You're basically you are doing Cold War ops stuff.
Yeah, so stealth secret well, I guess it'd be like stealth adventure, stealth action adventure.
Yeah,
Mm, Okay. I We didn't use action adventure. We only used adventure. So stealth action game. The
yeah.
60s is a good stealth action. Yeah, okay. I could see that. Your height of the Cold War. Well, it's not really the height. I guess the height of the Cold War was like the late 70s through the 80s. But
I mean, it
60s
just
is when everybody still had all the power. Like there were still two sides that were really slugging it out and nobody knew who had the upper hand type thing. So okay. Okay. I could see that.
that's why I'm like third person stealth game.
So it'd be like a hit. Well, okay. Hitman is sort of stealth, but I don't know that I would call Hitman a stealth game.
It is.
If it's gonna be like a Hitman game where you're like putting on disguises, because like if you're talking like Metal Gear Solid or Splinter Cell, heavy stealth game, or like
Right.
Thief.
That's like not being seen. Period. I'm talking more of like a double agent.
Okay.
More of like you will have to do. This is a game where like sometimes you'll need to be super stealthy, but other times you need to blend in. You need to like you need to like make talk around. You talk like you pretend like be a double agent, talk Russian, or whatever.
Yeah,
Attend parties, whatever. Like take out silent assassinations. While in the middle of a crowd, kind of thing.
I can dig that. Yeah, 60s makes sense for that. A lot of people think that the 60s was all about peace and love, but you look back on that and you read about it, it
No,
was hyper violent and sort of crazy, actually. Um, okay, 60s, no, okay, 70s. I got something for you
okay.
that maybe you won't agree with. 70s is the racing decade.
I was wondering what decade was because I'm not a big interested. Like, what decade would be the racing
So
decade?
the end of the 60s and into the 70s is when muscle cars really came about, like
Mhm.
really, the 1960 late 60s GTO. The 69 was the judge, but everybody knows 67 and 68 GTO is way cooler. Suck it, Welzenbach. Um,
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I'm not even hyper into cars. It's just like the 70s is when like when did Ford enter?
The Le Mans or whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, Ford entering into the Le Mans was in 1966, so end of the 60s. So 70s is when those races really,
So
like
70s is our racing zone. Now, here's the thing. Do you want it to just be do we want we're talking like just racing in official official tournaments, or are we talking, it's the 70s, so we could do like a little Need for Speed Hot Pursuit here and literally recreate Smokey and the Bandit,
your Dukes of Hazard that shit.
right? Like
Yeah. You could totally get away with doing that. What's
cuz
funny
like,
is I think the Dukes of Hazard do drive a judge.
I mean, they drive some muscle car with whatever. I don't know what it is.
The two
Orange
time the two
ugly thing.
times that I know of that like street racing was huge in the United States, the 2 decades, is in the 40s and in the 70s.
Hmm.
I know definitely there was a big street
In the
racing
2000s.
and the 2000s, yeah, because Fast and Furious made it
Yep.
super big in the States. Now, I don't necessarily know street racing in Europe, what the timeline would be for that. And, you know,
Japan is way more 80s
Japan, yeah,
for
80s
street
is,
for street racing.
and like motorcycle racing was from the 30s all the way through to the 70s, 80s.
Right. So what
You know,
I guess I want to ask here, do we want it to be a race course doing laps, or are we talking something that's a little more akin to Crazy Taxi, Need for Speed, Burnout, like
oh,
or could it be both? I don't know.
I'm more along that Cruisin' USA / Need for Speed street racing.
And I prefer that myself. So
Yeah,
I'm like
everyone had a muscle car and were racing. Now,
something like
granted, it wasn't drifting.
Outrun or Burnout or
Yes.
something.
Or the best racing game ever, Rush.
Yeah, here we go. Well, technically that's laps, but yeah. Um,
But still, it happened in a city ish, sort of.
yeah,
There was a track, but uh yeah, I know everybody's sitting there like Initial D, but no.
that's 80s.
Yeah, Initial D is in the 80s, but like
Well, the cars are from the 80s though,
and
so
everyone always says like that's the best racing game, and they're wrong, but people like to say that.
well, it has the
Uh,
best soundtrack.
maybe. Maybe.
Eurobeat, baby. But no, I'm actually I feel you on racing because it could be a game that's like you're a smuggler, like again going back to fucking Smokey and the Bandit, or if it's more like you said, like a cruising or an outrun or a street racing gig or something. I think that would actually be kind of fun. Like, could you like what was it? Is it French Connection or whatever that the genre or that movie that like in the 70s that made that had the cam had that street race, not street race, but like the
The car chase?
car chase
I
with
think
the
maybe you're
police or
talking
whatever.
about Bullet, and I think Bullet was in the late 60s.
I thought it was French Connection. Yeah, but it was like they're in like New York or something in like
1968. It's in San Francisco.
oh, okay, San Francisco, and I remember this in film class where they're talking about because they put the camera like on the hood of the car and they had all this first person like hood cam stuff in it.
Well, the French Connection does have stuff like that, but the movie that made car chases famous and had a bunch of stuff like that influenced that was Bullet. Bullet
That's
was
Steve
like,
McQueen, isn't it?
oh yeah, it was like the movie that made turtlenecks sexy and made car chases with like first person hood shots, stuff like that. It's got like a 20-minute car chase in it or something like that. I don't. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but Bullet. Um, I mean, Steve McQueen was effortlessly stylish. Dude made khakis sexy.
Guy is basically the '60s Daniel Craig.
Sort of, yeah.
Kind of has that look
Well,
about him.
he's more like the '60s Chris Evans. He could do comedy. He could do
Hmm.
badass. He could do, and he was even when he was dressed goofy, and he often dressed like all sorts of goofy. Like he did a Mister Rogers thing where when he went home, he'd get into indoor shoes and put on a cardigan. Him and Paul Newman. Paul Newman was the other guy from the '60s that was just like
Yeah,
effortlessly
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper Dennis Hopper was blacklisted in Hollywood in the '60s. But he um it turns out worldwide outside of the United States, Dennis Hopper was a famous photographer.
Mm.
And he has all these portraits of Paul Newman and him just hanging out randomly at different places, but all these like super famous portraits of Paul Newman that don't get credited in the United States for the longest time. They were taken by Dennis Hopper on his like personal camera. Like, have you ever
Dang.
seen that portrait of like Paul Newman sitting on the other side of a chain link fence, sort of relaxing and looking into the distance? It gets
Probably.
remade and used and all sorts of stuff. They reference it all the time in fashion. Yeah, Dennis Hopper just did that on a Saturday. They were hanging out. He just like busted that picture out. But yeah, Paul Newman was another guy like that. Just like he could wear whatever goofy crap he wanted and he would just look amazing. But yeah, so 70s is the decade of the racing. It could be car chase. It could be like vigilante too. It could be the decade of car combat too, because muscle
Yeah.
cars were the influence on car combat stuff. Monster trucks and muscle cars, I suppose, but monster trucks were never super cool to me.
Mm-hmm.
They're sort of cool just for the behemoth aspect, right? Like they're cool because they have no reason to exist. And I kind of love the idea. I'm a utilitarian at heart in most ways, but also I admire the audacity of humanity to create something that has absolutely no purpose or reason to exist other than the fact that like it's big, it's loud, it's cool.
That
You know?
was the 70s muscle cars.
Yeah, is I mean, you know, you go and I forget what his actual name in the movie, the Mad Max movie, Fury Road, where it's like just the dude playing the guitar,
Oh, the Doofmeister or
the
the Doof
Doofmeister, or whatever.
Doof
That
Warrior. Sorry, Doof Warrior.
Doof Warrior, thank you. That whole thing, dude, on bungees in front of huge amps with flames and stuff like that. Yes, just you know, I don't know. When we're talking about driving down a city block and you just see that at the front of a parade, coolest parade ever. Terrifying, depending on the context of the parade, but cool as fuck.
Sure.
All right, let's hop into the 80s because I feel like there's several genres we're gonna want for the 80s.
Yeah. What do we? Boy, where does one go in the 80s?
80s could be fighting games.
Thought about that, and then I was like, people will say it exists, but I'm sorry, like four tiny city blocks is not enough. Open world Tokyo or open world Vegas in the 80s.
Open world, yeah. So we're gonna say it's gonna be open world adventure, like a Yakuza, but it takes place in Vegas in the
Yeah,
80s. The 50s and 60s were like the real wild times.
sure, but it's kind of like it's though the point would being like because like old Vegas is coming in front of new Vegas of the 90s where they kind of tried to like change the image from the original, you know, dad goes here, you know, casino mob run, you know, I mean it still is, but like the idea was like they were trying
Nah,
to
it's all
like
corporate now. That's why it sucks.
well, yeah.
Look, say
Uh,
what you want about the mobsters, but they knew how to run Vegas. If you stuck with the rules, you have a great time in Vegas. The whole reason you don't talk about what happens in Vegas became a thing is because you literally don't talk about what happened in Vegas. Like the mob ran that place better than corporations ever do.
oh, for sure.
Their profit
So
margins were actually worse than corporations bend you over harder than the mob did. Think about that.
mhm.
Like the mob wanted the prestige of Vegas. This is a real thing. Like mobsters talk about like how mobs sold to corporations to get out of it. And then corporations sort of killed what made Vegas special.
Of course.
You can I'm blanking on the name of the book, but it was written by the mob owned mayor of Vegas. He was like the guy that ran Vegas on behalf of the mob. He was like the mob's concierge or consigliere, and he was or consigliere, I think is the word. And he was the mayor of Vegas for like the big mob years. I think it's him that wrote this book talking about like all the rules of Vegas that you had, but
Mhm.
also the fact that like that was when you could go have like the regular guy could go have like a hot night in Vegas and feel like a king because the mob didn't even force the same profit margins the corporations do now.
Mm,
And games weren't nearly as rigged. Like the
strangely.
odds were and if you won fair. If you didn't win fair, you got your legs broke. But that's don't cheat. If you're not cheating, you got nothing to worry about,
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. Like a full, because we've seen of open world Vice City, we know that exists, and
Mhm.
but that's Miami. But I'm just saying, like, we've never gotten an open world, like an actual open world Tokyo in the '80s. We've gotten Yakuza Zero, but it's 4 city blocks. It's like, sure,
And there's a lot packed into there, though.
there is, but I'm talking like a game that like involves like the train system. Would involve like going around. Like it could involve the street racing on the
Multiple
outskirts.
clans,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
multiple
exactly, stuff
Yakuza
like that.
clans.
Hmm.
I would dig that, especially because the 80s was such an insane time in Tokyo.
Yeah,
Like
because I'm just trying to think of like anything that would like fully encompass the music, the style, the vibes. I hate that term, but like you get what I'm like,
yeah, no,
just
I get
something
it.
that like embraces all the things of that made that decade like what it was.
Synthwave, you have all
Right.
that. Yeah. No, I
So
dig that. I also like the idea of it like Yakuza being a brawler, like
yeah,
being open world but fist fights rather than mostly guns.
yeah,
Although, not to say that they didn't have guns, they absolutely did. They had a
of
lot of
course,
guns,
of course they
but
did.
uh, okay, I could see that. Um, yeah, that one's easier than I thought. 90s is sort of strange. Is 90s the tactical RPG or the RPG
Mm,
decade? Is it that it now granted, if we're talking about historically, a lot of the best RPG series started in the 90s.
right.
Like for instance, Final Fantasy VII, the very first Final Fantasy that anyone cared about. No, I'm kidding. The only one anyone talks about that started in the 90s. No, it's spicy for no reason, guys.
He's kind of right though.
But well,
And
it's
and if you want to argue 6/3, also '90s.
also 90s. Yeah, well, I mean, basically all the major Final Fantasies happened in the 90s.
I
When
think
did
one came out in '89 or something, 88, '89 for the first game, but
right? And then you had when did 9 come out? 9 was 2000?
2000, 2000.
Yeah. Yeah, and then 8, which everyone knows is the best one that was ever made, uh
99,
was 99. Amazing that it was like 97, 99, 2000.
2000, 2001 for 11.
God, they were busting that out.
Yeah.
Crazy times.
Yeah, you
Um, but I would have to say, if there's any other genre that could compete for the 90s, that the 90s it'd be the music genre, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Because 90s music, believe it or not, grunge, 90s pop, 90s rock, 90s alt rock,
Right, right.
believe it or not, 90s punk more than 80s punk still affects music today because corporations took over music in the early 2000s and artists don't actually make their own music anymore, it seems like.
Right.
Yee. Let's say something controversial. Um,
Well, my
but
question is how do we incorporate the music genre? Say if you're doing it decades, what is the '90s genre? Like what are we talking about here?
well, the 90s genre was probably rock generally. You
Sure,
think,
but what kind of game are we making?
I mean, it'd be like Rock Band, like
Mm,
that kind of like, or I mean, if you want to go with like 90s rap, you got like Parappa the Rapper and
hip hop and
that
stuff of
kind
the
of
early
that
'90s.
style of game, like the rhythm beat music game. But I was in my head, I was thinking Guitar Hero.
Mhm.
Yes, a lot of the most famous songs in Guitar Hero is 80s hair metal, but still 90s rock still like 90s could be a music genre, but I'm going to say RPG.
Oh,
Just general RPGs for the 90s.
how do you think, how do you envision it playing out? Like Earthbound, kind of, or
Oh, that would be kind of like a sort of in the suburbs. The last time the suburbs was culturally relevant and not just the cause of all our problems.
because here's what I was thinking. Like, okay, we say we did music rhythm genre game for the '90s, which I only take a little issue. 'Cause I'm like, I feel like you could release that at. It feels like I don't know. That just
Well,
sounds like a version of Rock Band '90s edition, whatever.
yeah, I don't
Um,
think I don't think I don't think it has to be all 90s music. I'm just
mhm.
saying that genre sort of dominates
Mm,
because the 90s were the three-person band was everywhere.
yeah,
Like, especially into the late 90s,
so
it's like a
goddamn
drummer, a
boring.
bassist, and a guitarist who sing.
So goddamn boring.
How dare you?
I've always had issue with this. Always. I've
You
always
hate
been like,
90s music?
I don't like. Well, look, it's way too broad to say I hate names. Like that's insanity.
Because there's so much good stuff.
I hate the similarity of so many bands in the sort of
Well,
alt
I
rock,
mean,
alt rock pop genre. Where like the three man band, like you said, drums, bass, lead guitar sings as well. So you had a lot of there's so many of just similar sounding music because they're using the same instruments. They're kind of playing similar enough, with doing,
yeah,
with
it's
the
just three chords and the
and
drummer often was really good in those bands,
I
but
mean, it's not like the drumming is bad, but what the music they're writing is kind of all requiring like the same, so very, as Alex McCullough was saying, like a sound wall. It just becomes like a wall of sound where it just sort of like all kind of blends. Anyways, I hate this genre because it felt very unexperimental. It felt like it was almost rebelling against the '80s, where they had a bunch of keyboardists and there's a lot of synth and electronica, and they wanted to get away from that, like in the sort of pop rock scene in the '90s. So they went back to bass, guitar, bass, electric guitar, bass, drum. That's it. That's all
it
we
can't
want.
be nearly as bad for you as early 2000s whiny voice. When
Oh
I was
yeah.
in high school, every
Oh
lead
my.
singer had that whiny voice that
The
was
thing is I remember
it's
at that time
like they listened to
making.
Blink 182 and was like, I could be whinier.
I could be whining. Well, the thing is, I remember at that time, I remember living through that and being like making fun of it. Everyone was making fun of it at the time.
And
So
yet now we think
I
of
have
it
no
as
nostalgia for it, but I always am just kind of like, yeah, we were making fun of this as it was happening
yeah, I
because
mean, and
we
yet
all
there's
saw
still
it.
like your Yellow Card and uh your various bands of that sort where they have like the whiny
Dashboard Confessionals.
dashboard confessional. And I'm over here like Modest Mouse was not whiny, but he had like that other twangy voice where like it would randomly, you know what I'm talking about? Modest Mouse has that
Who's the
like
guy? Yeah, who's the guy? He
I like
wrote
Modest Mouse.
Umbrella Academy, I think. He did like the Black Parade song. Even though it does actually use more instrumentation, but it has that sort of whiny voice too.
Is that My Chemical
Um,
Romance? I think it's My
My
Chemical.
Chemical Romance? Yeah, whatever. I don't know these. I worked in two music stores and I still don't know who did what. Um, but yeah, no, I don't I really
Yeah, it's
dislike
My
the sort
Chemical
of,
Romance.
yeah, I really dislike the pop rock era of the '90s because it just sounded so similar to me. Like the most they would ever do was add a cymbal in, and I'm like, bit whiff, woohoo.
So it's the RPG. It's the RPG era
Well,
or
here's the thing.
decade.
I actually wanted to like amend maybe. I wanted to do an amendment if you were gonna go, if you were gonna say like let's music rhythm, and I was gonna say 20s should be an RPG. The Roaring 20s should be a big big gory sexy RPG.
Rather than the point and
Point and
click.
click. That's what I'm saying. I want to amend this. I want to amend this
Okay.
to RPG in the 20s.
Okay.
I think that's actually more exciting actually. Um It doesn't even. It could be turn based. It could not be turn based. But it would be kind of fun if it was like Expedition 33, where you had like, you're in an
Yeah.
alley and you're just like, like, oh, the mobsters are all lined up with their Tommy guns and just doing like this like really hyperactive, precision based turn based thing. Might be kind of fun. And you could have
Okay.
all kinds of different classes, like the flapper class, which is sort of like a bard slash mage, and like how like that would like blur into stuff,
And then what your gangster class is the ranger, kind of uses distance weapons.
Yeah, yeah. Or you could have like, different types of like gangsters, because one could be like, your thief, quote unquote,
Oh,
like
right. Yeah.
like the little like scrawny guy and like the little hat, and he's just like, yeah, boss. You want me to stick him?
that mid-Atlantic fucking. Okay, I can dig that. Uh, that's our 20th century by the decade picking a genre to.
But we haven't settled on the 90s though, unless that's what we're
Well,
settling
okay.
for music.
Now yeah, I don't know if I want to settle for music. Let's see. What we haven't done sandbox game necessarily.
We haven't done fighting game either.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we said.
Now, fighting games were never bigger than the 90s.
Yeah, fighting game actually makes sense because I don't know if you remember this from the 90s, but this was a key core memory. Do you remember street fighting actually was like it had its moment in the 90s where everyone was like, you have those YouTube channels today that's like, oh, it's the fight channels or whatever, but 90s schoolyard fights was like the thing in the 90s. Like every movie had a schoolyard fight. Every like schoolyard fights was like a cultural touchstone, at least in the US in the 90s. Like movies, music, I think even video games were based around street fights. Street Fighter, obviously. But so yeah, actually I would change the 90s as the fighting game. We would
It's
do a
gotta
fighting
be.
game.
Has to be.
And
Yeah.
granted, Street Fighter already
90s.
perfectly encapsulates what I would picture a 90s
Like,
fighting game.
one is it came out in 89, but like Street Fighter 2 came out in like 92. So it's like fighting game genre started and was never bigger than the 90s.
And it has Guile in his hardest American Empire drip. We never looked cooler than the 90s, man. Now everyone wears mushy brown. But back then, it made you
Now
want to
here's the crazy thing. Imagine, if you will, someone set into motion a plan, like a 10-year plan or whatever, different with different devs, but like they were all owned under the same umbrella. Imagine you like owned what's that a-hole in Europe who bought all the stuff up and then blew his chance with a big Saudi deal. Embracer.
Oh yeah. I was trying to think of the actual guy's name.
No. But imagine if you had that in a sane amount of IP umbrella, right? Or whatever. And it's like, what if every game in each decade was vaguely connected? Like each character or characters for each decade had a connection.
How would you pull that off though? How would you make that work?
I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, what if maybe they don't have to all be familial related, but like they were all a character in the 1910 game might interact or have some connection to the character in the 1900 or the 1920s, and that just kind of like just sort of like feeds. There's like this through line,
Right.
like very vague, not like this is not like you don't, just no game depends on it, but it's just kind of like, oh, that character
It's like reference other characters.
Yeah, like that character was in that game, and then that other one from that other genre, where it's like this sort of like, it's just the universe. It's the same timeline universe. Just
Okay.
The only people who'd really be aware be the players if they caught on. Like, for example, if a business in the 1950s Tycoon simulator is like a major corpo in say 1980s open world Tokyo.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
They're sponsoring your cars, your racers in the 70s, maybe.
So they're all sort of interconnected.
very loosely. You'll notice certain things.
Yeah, like a
that.
mobster in the Vegas, type game. If we did a game in Vegas,
In Vegas, yeah, it would be like connected to the 20s.
yeah, it would have like the same last name as a guy in the 20. Yeah, okay, I would get that. I get behind that stuff. I like that.
Like that would be a fun way to do it. Just like set up your 10-year game plan where it's like, okay, I have all these different genres here. Some are going to hit, some are not. Like no game is dependent on the other hitting. It's just like they'll be there, like somewhere. Like there's going to be a vague reference because if say you were a mega publisher.
So the fun thing that I'm going to do for anyone who has watched or listened to the end and commenting on YouTube or patrons in Patreon, what you would do for 2000 to 2009 and 2010 to 2020. That would be, since we didn't cover those decades, I'm going to leave it up to you guys. And obviously, I'm going to mercilessly mock you if you get it wrong. There's no wrong answer, but I will bully you over it. It can go both ways. I realize I'm going to get bullied for some of my answers anyway tonight. So I'm bullying back. On that note, we do have some patrons to thank. If you're interested in becoming a patron at any level, please check out patreon.com/YoVideogames podcast. Dude of the week was SFW. Thank you, SFW. And our producers for this episode are Dragon Wolf Makoto, Osnight, Zybernite, Scrunami, Croy35, Hyperviper89, LCL Mayhem, and Ziggy Z. Thank you, dudes. We will catch you next time.
Later, dudes.